Well, thanks all for joining. We're going to give it a couple of minutes. We're getting a whole lot of folks joining our discussion right now, and we'll begin in about 2 minutes. All right, we're going to get underway. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Wade Crowfoot, and I serve as our California Natural Resources Secretary. And our agency has a pretty incredible mission to help steward California's natural environment, as well as our culture and our history. And so, given that mission, I'm really excited to be here today and talk with a bunch of leaders and big thinkers about green schoolyards. This discussion is one of a series of discussions we have. We call it the Secretary Speaker Series. And it's our attempt to essentially look up from our desks, get out of our buildings, as it were, and then go talk to people across California that are doing really important things. So today we'll be having an opportunity to talk about just what's happening in schools across the states to cool the playgrounds, to green the playgrounds, to improve the educational environment for kids and have all of these benefits. We talk about it as a movement for green schoolyards, and we're really interested in how we can collectively work to build the movement, meaning to get more and more schoolyards actually green and healthy across our state. So we're going to talk with experts to help us understand how we can work together to do that. So our discussion today is recorded for what it's worth. And so if you like what you hear or you think others may be interested in hearing, you'll have an opportunity to go on to our website and to share a link of our discussion. You'll have an opportunity to pose questions as you're listening to our conversation here today. On the bottom of your screen, there is a Q&A button, and you can just type in a question or a comment, and then I'll see it and I'll work to integrate it into our conversation here today. Let's see, beyond that, just looking forward to a great conversation. We're together for the next hour and 10 minutes. And as I said, we have a number of really interesting, important leaders here today to talk about schoolyards. So first, I have the pleasure of introducing Sharon Danks. Now, if you work on schoolyards in California and greening schoolyards, you may know Sharon. She is the CEO of an entity called Green Schoolyards America. So it's really Sharon driving forward this national movement to green our schoolyards. And I'll mention that my colleague Mark has put in our chat function some more information about Sharon and her organization. And so Sharon, if we can bring you up on the screen, I'm interested in understanding from you just what we're talking about when we're talking about green schoolyards. I'll say that we're joined by a whole bunch of people from across the state and maybe beyond here today. And there may be some people that have spent half their career working on this topic. There may be some that are scratching their head, not really sure what we're talking about. So we were going to ask you to take some time, the first 5 or 10 minutes, and just talk about what we mean when we're talking about greening schoolyards. So welcome, Sharon.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Secretary Crowfoot, for inviting me to join you today. I'm really excited to be here. Green schoolyards are a topic.
Could you in just a couple sentences just share a little bit about your organization so people have a little context?
Sure. Well, first, I'm an environmental city planner by training and have been working on green schoolyards for the last 20 years. And Green Schoolyards America is an organization that partners with school districts and public agencies to bring the green schoolyard movement to scale so that all kids can have nature access at school when they're outside every day. They bring nature to them so that they can integrate it with their curriculum and their learning and their play and just overall health and well-being and enjoyment of life.
Wow. So you are the perfect person to ask this question to. So if you would kind of level set for us, and I know you have some slides to share about what we're talking about when we say green schoolyards.
Sure. Well, green schoolyards are basically park-like environments, and I will show you some pictures of that as we go. And I think it's what we have in California and actually across the country is really enormous variation in what our school grounds look like. And so I think it's hard for people who grew up in neighborhoods that are leafy and green to imagine that some are not. But there's really a hugely wide variation in what we have on our grounds across the whole country and across the state. And so we have, for example, many school grounds that are paved almost entirely. And with the 5.8 million kids in California going to school, it's about a total of about 130,000 acres of land, so quite a substantial amount altogether. And it matters. And so we're looking at this collectively and saying, how can this be shifted, right? So this is not a green schoolyard. This is a typical traditional 1940s style school ground. Next, please. And so it's not one district or another. It just is the way school grounds were designed and budgeted for in past decades. And so we see a lot of this this history still out there, and it's as temperatures are rising, a pretty harsh environment to be in, and it could be a lot more. We have a lot of land, and we are not using it to the extent that it could be. Next. And so we're thinking about school grounds as important places for communities and important places for children. And so I want to go through a couple of images of why they matter to us. This is a green schoolyard example that used to be paved and is now green, for example. Next. So the current design that we were just looking at there is what was typical in the 1940s or so and 1950s. It was environments designed for an era where our goal as an educational institution's goal was to help prepare kids to work in factories and to work in and to go to war, be physically fit for war. And we have different educational goals now as our curriculum. And so our grounds need to be updated to match the goals of the curriculum itself. We have a lot of hands-on learning being taught in our curriculum. And so we need grounds that can reflect that and can pull that, can be places to do the curriculum that you would like to teach. Next. And so access to green space is also a human right. And we have very unequal access to green space in our cities. And if we can make every school ground landscape into a green space with nature, then every child will be able to access nature every day. And we'll have that right. We recognize that right in our prison system, where we require that everyone get 2 hours of outdoor time a day. And so it's most of our kids don't even get that much time outside. So it's not only the quality of the environment, but the quantity of time that we're encouraging kids to be outside. I think it also needs to be increased before, during, and after school. It's not just a school problem on that front. Next. And again, the equity issue, it's the trees and green space is not equally distributed across the city. So if we were to do that at all school grounds, then all kids can walk out their school door and access nature. Next. And so we've been looking overall at what the roughly 10,000 schools in California, what their percentages of tree canopy are. And there's roughly 6,000 of them that have less than 5% shade. And so that means that millions of kids across California don't have any shade at school. And that's a really dramatic number, I think, and it's a big issue. Next. And collectively, the choices that all the school districts make about how they manage the land affects the ecology of their neighborhoods. It changes the microclimates of the neighborhoods to not have areas like this shaded. They heat up in the sun. So This does not have wildlife benefit in a photo like this. It isn't contributing to the ecology of its place, and it could be. Next. And these choices also have impacts on children's health and well-being, and they have impact on teachers' health and well-being and the community in general. And kids, because of their body size, are particularly vulnerable to rising temperatures, and we need to make sure that they have an oasis of cooler spaces to be able to get into, so that they will be out of the heat as temperatures rise. Next. And so what are green schoolyards or living schoolyards? I use those two terms interchangeably. I like living schoolyards these days because it describes the essence of what the space should be, which is alive with ecology, alive with ecosystems, and happy children. So to me, the living schoolyards or green schoolyards are richly layered park-like environments that strengthen local ecosystems and climate resilience, while also providing place-based hands-on learning resources for children and youth of all ages. And I'll go into a couple more pictures of what that might look like next. And so it's an umbrella term for including many things like school gardens or forests, and which are components of a green schoolyard, or stormwater features. Those are all parts of the larger park system, if you will, that a green schoolyard can be. And so within a green schoolyard, you can do many things. And one of those things is teach outside across the curriculum and across the grade levels. Almost every subject and almost every age can learn outside and use the outdoor environment for hands-on instruction. Next. And there are also, when you make a schoolyard, a green schoolyard, you also increase children's, especially in the elementary school level, you increase children's level of physical activity. And part of that is by providing a wider range of infrastructure choices for them to be active around. And part of that is by aligning the school's rules so that they can do things that are more active in the space that you give them. But in general, we see physical activity numbers going up in the literature that have studied health and school grounds. Next. And it's also true of mental health. We see in the literature that trees are associated with better mental health, that it helps reduce stress levels and helps to calm periods of trauma that kids have experienced. They find calm outside after having a really rough time. And they are also places to provide collaborative activities. A sandbox like this is the best bang for your buck, because you can have 20 kids collaborating without a teacher on a project that they come up with at recess and working on in this case, building a city of some sort with a river. But it allows them to communicate and to practice working together, collaborative activities. Next. And to me, fundamentally, green schoolyards are places that are designed for children. They're designed to center the kids and the youth, and they are places that are meant to increase joy and laughter and happiness, and that is the central design goal for these places. Happy children is the outcome you want to see, and you do that with these ecological systems around it as the framework, and the learning as a component. But the happy children, I think, for me, is the main identifier of what a green schoolyard is as a goal. Next, along with the living systems. Yeah, and so ecological and climate resilience are outcomes of having a really diverse green space for the children to be in. This is an image from Germany of a site that was 100% paved when they started, and 30 years ago, the city of Berlin unpaved 400 schoolyards and put in trees everywhere, and so they've grown in over time, and we've got great models of what happens when you do that. So we know that when you unpave and put in ecosystems, you can create child-friendly green infrastructure that does all the things that we want our green infrastructure to do, like absorbing stormwater and strengthening wildlife habitat corridors and allowing cooling the neighborhoods and improving air quality. And children also get fabulous places to play and learn. Next. I think that's all.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sharon. And we could obviously spend the whole hour talking about each of those different components, but something you've educated me about is there's no one size fits all for a green schoolyard. Some green schoolyards, as you've said, have a garden and big shade trees. Others take more of a forest approach. But I appreciate that you've talked about that. The best ones achieve multiple functions, including being that outdoor classroom for kids, certainly helping be fun, healthy places for kids. So it sounds like these kind of evolve differently in different places.
Definitely, it's kind of a layered land use idea, like that we should be using this land that's outside of the schools as a precious resource. We should consider it a precious resource that we layer many uses on. So we can have PE taking place there, but we can also have classes outside. It can be community center of activity. It can do that in a framework that's ecological so that it performs all the green infrastructure functions that we would like it to do while setting up this framework. And so in its largest form, it's the whole site that the school is in is changed. But it also certainly it starts small frequently with small projects or areas, or sometimes specialized projects like gardens or a patch of trees or a wildlife area. And it can grow from there, but it's interdisciplinary, multifunctional, ecologically rich space for children at school.
Thanks. And I'll say one more thing, that riffing on something you mentioned is, in California and in our agency, we're really focused on protecting people and nature from the impacts of accelerating climate change. And one impact is, worsening extreme heat and heat waves that are going to be more consistent across more parts of the state. And we just issued actually an updated extreme heat action plan. And I'm really pleased that one of the key recommendations in that action plan is to do more of what we're talking about here today, which is help cool and green schoolyards as a way to cool down the learning environment and the place where kids are spending most of their days. And I was really gratified that in the last month, our administration, thanks to the governor, has proposed $50 million of first-time ever funding specifically to support local school districts putting in green schoolyards. I think we recognize it's an important amount of money, but a small down payment in terms of what would be needed, but still a really big deal because this would be the first specific funding program for green schoolyards. James, if you can bring up the next slide, I do want to share with everybody. Part of what brings us to this work is funding that's existed or that's been directed within state agencies on green schoolyard projects already. And this is a state map, obviously, or actually a map that zeroes in, a state map and a map that zeroes in on where different agencies have funded green schoolyard projects. The red ones are funded by our agency, the Natural Resources Agency. And the green ones are the State Coastal Commission. Blue ones are our State Water Resources Control Board. Yellow ones are Department of State Parks or Parks and Recreation. And then orange ones are CAL FIRE. And we'll talk to the state's urban forester in just a little bit. Now, I share this just to provide a little context that we're not starting from zero in terms of being involved at the state agency level. But as we know, while we're excited about these projects, the discussion here today is all about how we can scale up this work. Thanks, James. You can take that down. So I want to shift into a conversation with a few leaders now, and it's really to talk about what's happening on the ground across California, giving us a sense of some of the energy that's building around green schoolyards. And so I'm first excited to introduce Neelam Patil. Neelam is a dynamo, as I've learned, an elementary school teacher in Berkeley, California, who, in addition to teaching, has spearheaded the creation of a unique and first of its kind forest on her campus, her educational campus. So Neelam, so excited to be with you, and equally your young scholars here. Take a moment to introduce yourselves.
Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here as well. My name is Neelam Patil. I am a science teacher at Oxford Elementary in Berkeley Unified School District, and These three students are my students. They're also members of the Oxford Green team. Do you want to introduce yourselves?
My name is Kanav. My name is Judah. My name is Rafa.
So we're here today to share with you our experiences about the Miyawaki Forest, which, can everyone see me? My screen seems to be frozen. Okay,
No,
good.
we can see you.
We're here to share about our experience with the Miyawaki Forest. As you may know, teaching and learning about climate change can be very depressing. And so I've been very alarmed as a science teacher, especially in Berkeley, California, where the number of smoke days are really impacting our learning, and the fire season is just getting longer and longer every school year. So we were basically talking about deforestation. Oh yeah, I think I'm not spotlighted. We're basically talking about deforestation and how one whole football field of trees gets cut down every 6 seconds. Okay, there we are. Hi, everyone. So that's a really depressing fact. And so what we wanted to do was not just focus on the problems, but also focus on solutions. So I found out about this concept, the Miyawaki Forest, about 2 years ago, and just started doing a worldwide search about how can I have this, how can I bring this to my school, because the statistics around it are truly incredible. The wonderful thing is, after 3 years, it creates a self-contained environment, meaning it's drought tolerant and you don't need to water it anymore. And in a drought impacted California, that is huge, especially with the amount of land we have in schools. So the secret to it is planting native saplings that are drought tolerant, and also we do an ultra dense planting, which forces the saplings to compete for light and grow tall very quickly. And so there's just some amazing science around this. I know people were maybe wondering, like, whoa, that sounds a little too good to be true, but it's been done all over the world, as well in the United States. And the proof is in the pudding. We have seen the results, and we're very excited to see the saplings grow in our forest. So we planted 3 forests in our Berkeley schools, and I'm very grateful for the partnership with Steve Collins, who is the manager of the Berkeley facilities and grounds, and he was open to this idea because he's also worried about climate change. And so we got some funding from a nonprofit, and we were able to plant these 3 forests. And I also want to give a shout out to the California Institute for Biodiversity, which has also been supporting our work to bring more Miyawaki forests to all the. So when we planted these forests, they just sort of took off. And it's just evolved into a life of its own. And I think the biggest transformation has been in my students and the community. Like I said, when we start to learn about climate change, it can get very depressing, but this is a very impactful and immediate solution. And the most special thing, and these 3 students, they haven't even gotten a forest. They are advocating for a forest at their school, but we were able to plant it at 3 other schools. And just the process of having the planting ceremony, partnering with local indigenous tribal leaders to come and bless the land and do land declarations and give us examples of land stewardship, improving biodiversity on campus and in that space was truly just, it was a game changer for our whole school. And
wow.
Yeah.
That's incredible.
So,
And, well, I was going to say, to me, as I've been educated, at least right now, these projects require champions, people that are, saying, we need to do this. We're going to do this. And Neelam, you're obviously one of them. And then you've got 3 young students who are also there. Maybe just a quick question to them. Why are you guys involved in this work? You could be doing other things. Why are you advocating to get a forest on your campus?
yeah, go ahead.
I'm working for this because My mom also works for climate change, so she's taught me a lot about it. And like Miss Patil, I'm also scared about climate change. So I thought, hey, there's a green team, and if I go to green team, then I'm helping saving the planet, and I only have to skip recess. So that's why I went to green team.
Okay, Rafa.
My name's Rafa, and one of the main reasons that I joined Green Team was because I'm scared for like my future generations and coming after us, and also like right now, this is like not something for future. It's also happening to lots of people right now. So that was really my, mindset going into this.
Awesome. Thanks, Rafa.
When I found out about the green team, I was like, I really want to help my planet. My brother was in the 5th grade class. That's a zero waste 5th grade class, and he helped pass the Single-Use Plastics Act.
Wow.
So I kind of wanted to follow in his footsteps, but take my own path at the exact same time. And I thought, this seems really fun.
Well, you have done that. And you guys, you are making a difference. We talk about, climate change does get a little scary, but we all maintain hope and we make progress by taking action. And you guys are really stepping up as leaders. So we're really excited to learn more about the forest that you get next to your school. And I want to note for everyone that Mark has put in the chat an article on Neelam's work in the Berkeley School District. And then hopefully Neelam knows this, but also shared her email if you want to reach out to understand how you might be able to do what she and her students are pulling off. So
Well,
yeah.
Our vision is to have meal so 25 years ago, it was a novel idea to have a schoolyard garden. And now a school is incomplete without a garden. So my vision is to have that same sort of evolution for Miyawaki Forest, that a schoolyard would feel incomplete without a Miyawaki Forest.
Well, huge. You've started our discussion here today with a huge exclamation point. Big thanks to you guys, and we appreciate all that you're doing. Next, I want to introduce my colleague, Mark Stanley. Mark leads one of our state conservancies, our Rivers and Mountains Conservancy in Greater LA. And I asked Mark to join us because he actually showed us one of the projects that his conservancy has funded that is greening a schoolyard, a community center in the San Gabriel Valley. And Mark, you're one of these folks in state government that's already funding these projects. So want to ask you, why is this a priority for the conservancy you lead? And then if you could, give us a couple of examples of the work.
Well, that is a great question. So why a conservancy is getting involved in these types of opportunities? Well, it really comes down to the numbers. If you look at the amount of park space that's in an urbanized area like the Los Angeles metropolitan area, you really don't have that much opportunity. We've got 90 regional and local parks. You compare that to the number of school campuses that we have in the metropolitan area, over 2,200. Even if we were to get a small fraction of those, we can greatly expand the green space. And we can bring what these kids see when they walk to school, the San Gabriel Mountains. Basically, we can bring that greening to their neighborhoods, something that they're going to experience every day that they go to school. And we also create greater stewards for our environment by having that right there on campus. And they become stewards of helping with the maintenance of the campus. If you think about it, we're bringing the classroom outside with these efforts. So it became something that, because we have a challenge of green space within the metropolitan area, that this is a great opportunity for us to greatly expand upon that and create greater stewards for our environment. We've worked with 3 different school districts so far, anywhere from elementary school, middle school. We're about to do a high school as well. So all educational levels that we're going to be involved with helping to remove the asphalt, take out some of the lawn, put in more of a native type of environment, that helps to bring that classroom outside and becomes part of the learning experience. So we're very excited about this. We're very excited about being involved in the various projects. And the examples of what we've done so far has been amazing for the communities. What you see on the screen there is the overall vision about how we can green the metropolitan area of Los Angeles. You see those green corridors that are possible because of our major waterways and the tributaries to those waterways. If you flip to the next slide, these are the type of benefits that we're bringing to the school campuses. You know, there's infiltration opportunities, there's bioswales, there's the change in the payment, so they can provide infiltration of water as well. And it also, as you've already heard, helps cool that environment with the tree canopies that can be brought onto campus. Next slide. And we work with each of the school campuses in terms of what's native to their environment. So everything is not going to be the same on each campus that we work on. And there's different opportunities. There's different amounts of space that we can provide the enhancements within. You see some kids there in their courtyard. And like I said, it brings the classroom outside. And I think, you know, given that we've gone through the last 2 years, I think people are understanding the benefits of not just having that classroom inside, but bringing it outside and within their own community. Next slide. So here are some images of before and after, you know, what we can create. I mentioned the asphalt, I mentioned the lawn. You know, part of the challenge is we're not only helping to create stewards of the kids, but there's also, you know, a different way of thinking amongst the adults too. The reason why a lot of the reason why we got to this point where there's just asphalt and grass is because of the maintenance cost, right? That was quick. You know, you can have this, you can lower your maintenance costs if it was cookie cutter at every campus. Well, we're bringing back the native environment, and we're not looking at increasing the maintenance costs. So that's part of our education opportunity with people who maintain these campus environments. And like I said, those kids become stewards. So they care about these locations, and they're willing to help with the maintenance of them as well. Next slide. Here's another example. This is Plymouth Elementary School. As you can see, I keep jumping on stewards. The kids are very involved. They're very excited. Education opportunity. It goes to what you've heard already, mental health, physical health, and it provides additional education that they actually can get their hands on instead of just reading it from a book. Next slide. So we partner as a Conservancy, we partner with our communities, our nonprofit organizations, the school districts, and the families who have kids that go to these school systems. Many times we get volunteers that are actually helping to maintain the campuses on a weekend. And these are campuses that are providing public access. So it's not only used as a school ground, but it also provides public access to the community when the kids are not there at school. So we're looking forward to spreading this across the entire metropolitan Los Angeles area and expanding that green space. I mean, these are just tremendous opportunities when you live in an area where there's limited opportunity for open space.
Yeah, so well put, Mark, and such a nice presentation, and demonstrates that you all are working with partners to get it done. I heard the importance of partnering with communities, designing around what the needs and the desires of the school are, addressing that question around maintenance costs and not trying to elevate maintenance costs, which of course is probably a concern to local school districts. And then where possible, providing public access on the weekends. So yet you're opening up that green space to build more equitable access to the outdoors. So really, really inspiring work. Thank you and your team. I want to shift now to Walter Passmore. And Walter, you have a great title, a remarkable title, and that is our state's urban forester. And a lot of folks, when we think about CAL FIRE, we think about those heroes that are fighting our wildfires or managing our forests and our landscapes. But there's a whole heck of a lot of work that CAL FIRE has spearheaded on urban forests that include green schoolyards. So, Walter, if you want to just talk a little bit about the work that CAL FIRE is doing, and then reflect a little bit about what's been happening in the state from the state agencies' perspectives, and where we think we're going toward.
Sure. Thank you for that introduction, and do want to reiterate a couple of points that Secretary Crowfoot made earlier. We've made historic investments in green schoolyard projects over the years, but they've usually been smaller projects. They've been components of projects. We've tried to do work where we thought it was needed, but with support from the governor, the state legislature, we now have focused funding to make a substantial investment in creating better conditions in multiple schools. We're really excited about this effort, but I also want to, frame it in a way that you're not overly optimistic that we're going to correct all of these issues immediately. This is a huge investment, but we're probably only going to touch the most needed 1% of schoolyards over the next few years. We still have a lot of work to do. And in order to do that, I want to reiterate, a point that Mark Stanley made, which was developing those stewards at the schools. I really connect that back to what we do with all of our grants, which is to establish the personal connection between people and nature. So we want nature to be as essential a component of the community as any other piece of infrastructure, and as meaningful as any of our friends or family. So, we need to consider nature as a part of who we are as a people. That's what we're striving to do. There's a lot of work that needs to be done. So, we talked a little bit about the funding piece. We're really thankful that we're investing a significant amount of money more into greening schoolyards, but we also need to work on policy. We need to work on analysis of where projects need to be installed. We need to get out information that is distributed through the students back to the parents. We need to create partnerships so that we're not just trying to solve the problem with projects. We're also establishing that long-term relationship so that projects are maintained, so that those landscapes mature and provide the benefits over the long term.
Yeah, those are good. And then, Walter, let me ask you, I think you guys think a lot about Canopy, and you've been really clear with me that Canopy is not equally distributed around the state. Can you just talk a little bit about that and what we're talking about in terms of tree canopy in the urban environment?
Right. So the general trend is that canopy cover is less where we have disadvantaged communities, low income communities, communities of color. There are exceptions. However, we've seen that some of the historic policies have exacerbated disparities in tree canopy cover. We have policies such as assigning responsibility of street trees to adjacent owners that really is a challenge for a low income property owner to maintain a public street tree. So, oftentimes what happens is that tree is neglected and dies over time. It's the same with landscape. It's the same with school campuses. So, we have a lot of work to do to change the culture of how we think about our responsibilities to take care of nature.
So true. Well, so, what we've done in the first part of our conversation is help define what we're talking about when we're discussing green schoolyards. Big thanks to Sharon on that. And then through talking to Neelam and Mark and Walter, really understanding what kind of projects are underway. So now we're going to shift the rest of our conversation to understanding, where we need to go from here and what's our vision for the future and how we're going to get there towards scaling up green schoolyards. And I want to have a conversation with 4 colleagues here. The first, and James, if you could bring everybody up on screen, I'd appreciate it. Kelly Gonez is the president of the LA Unified School District, which is our largest school district in the state by far. And I'm really, really thrilled to have recently met Kelly and invited her to this conversation. Also joining for this part of the conversation is Guillermo Rodriguez. Guillermo is an old friend from the Bay Area who leads Trust for Public Land in California. And that nonprofit organization, TPL, has made a major investment and priority in equitable access and green schoolyards. And then also inviting Sharon back, who you've met, as well as Walter. So Kelly, I want to start with you. You have a really intense job leading the school board of the largest district in the state. I imagine you all have any number of issues that you're juggling at once. Talk about where, schoolyard greening fits within the priorities in LA Unified and why it's something that you're interested in talking about.
Absolutely. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for including me in this important conversation. And thank you, Secretary Crowfoot, for bringing this inspiring group of leaders together. I know I'm super excited after hearing about the Milwaukee forests and want to bring some of those to LA Unified now. But LA Unified has about 1,000 campuses across Southern California. So when you're thinking about scale, it's huge. And while more than 400 of our schools have gardens or agricultural areas, most in general lack sufficient green space for our students to play and learn. As others have shared, we know the benefits of green space for our kids, benefits for mental and emotional health, academic success, and of course, for the broader environment in combating climate change. Transforming our school spaces with more green space and green infrastructure will make our campuses more resilient and ensure that our kids have safe and cool environments to play in, which is especially important in communities like mine. LA Unified serves overwhelmingly students from low-income households. My district in the East San Fernando Valley has consistently hot weather, and these are neighborhoods that have been deeply environmentally impacted over time by industry and environmental injustices. And it's also historically park poor, so there is not the same access to green space in our communities that others in more affluent neighborhoods have. That's what makes the issue of green space on our campuses so important for me. Not only is it about the success and well-being of our children, but it is about these broader environmental justice issues for the students and families and communities that we serve. And I think in LA Unified, it has become a more recent priority for us. And I think we're at a tipping point. LA Unified made a priority to bring green spaces to our campus through a 2021 board resolution where we called out that we need to remove asphalt and unnecessary portable classrooms. And instead of replacing them with asphalt, which is the typical practice and policy, to circle back on the policy piece, we want to replace it with green space. And that commitment has been furthered through our superintendent's 100-day plan. I want to talk a little bit about the details of creating new green space in a district. As you can see, you saw in an earlier slide, we have a seeds program. So through some of our bond dollars, we're providing direct funding to schools to create outdoor sustainable classrooms for students that can be leveraged as part of their school's curriculum. And we do that in partnership with nonprofit and community-based organizations who can help us sustain those efforts. We are also building throughout our early education centers, which serve about 15,000 2 to 4-year-olds throughout LA Unified. We are building Nature Explorer outdoor classrooms, which allow our youngest learners, for whom this is so important developmentally, among other issues, to really have these hands-on learning opportunities in safe, shaded spaces, and really to interact with nature. And both of these programs were able to get established and expand because we got a bond measure passed by the voters of LA back in 2020. That's just one piece of greening, of course. We are also working to add more shade trees to really combat that urban heat island effect, which we know is a reality on so many of our campuses. So at Pacoima Middle School, where Secretary Crowfoot and I met, thanks to CNRA's support, we're replacing asphalt with shade trees and a beautiful green space that the entire campus can enjoy. Just steps away from a major freeway. So a place that really needs this investment. The biggest challenges, and I think others have touched on it, and those in the Q&A as well are asking great questions, is scale, is funding, and I think is sustained prioritization of this effort. With more than 1,000 campuses, we know that we don't have the local funding to be able to do the greening at scale that we think is required and that our kids deserve. So it's really about sustained funding streams locally, using state dollars and partnerships with community organizations to make these projects a reality at scale and not more of an ad hoc effort, which I think is more of the reality right now. And then, I think maintenance and liability have been highlighted as well as ongoing issues. Those are real. And I think we know the reality is that prior to very recently, our schools in California have been underfunded for decades. And so you often find that school districts are struggling between, replacing an HVAC, fixing a leaky roof, or investing in a green space. And those are difficult choices to make. And so I think if there are more opportunities for us to tap into sustained funding streams, I think there's some folks in the Q&A talking about access to stormwater capture dollars, different funding streams that school districts maybe historically have not tapped into, that'll really allow us to grow this effort and get to the scale that we know is required. But so glad for conversations like this to bring folks together, to exchange ideas, and really keep the momentum going around green schoolyards for all kids.
Oh, thanks so much, Kelly. And we're getting some great Q&A. And if you have a question and you're tuning in here, you can put it in the Q&A, and we're going to integrate it and answer a bunch of these. I really appreciate your point around the need for more consistent scaled funding. And I also think the reality is it's going to be some combination of state funding, but also local funding. And if we think about the amount of money that is spent on school facilities raised by local communities, boy, if we can shift, that the paradigm or the norm becomes green schoolyards versus asphalt, that's going to be really, really helpful. So as those investments get made at the local level, they're made in a sustainable way. So great. Thank you so much. Guillermo, I'm interested, you lead an organization that I think of a little bit more as a traditional environmental organization and protecting open space and, areas up in the hills or on the outsides of cities. And you all have made a shift to schoolyards. So can you talk a little bit about that and then unpack, like Kelly, some of the opportunities, but also the challenges you all have encountered at the Trust for Public Land?
Sure. Thank you, Secretary Crowfoot, for hosting this incredibly important conversation in the state. And, my thanks to the administration and all of the various agencies that have been funding organizations that are, really doing some incredible work at helping school districts across the state of California think about green schoolyards and pilot those as proof of concepts. TPL, the Trust for Public Land, kind of came into the green schoolyard movement through the lens of park equity. Today there are 100 million people across this country, 28 million children who don't live within a 10-minute walk to a quality park or open space. And for low-income, vulnerable, minority communities, that's even a higher number and percentage. But in all of those communities, there's a public school. But those public schools look like those pictures that Sharon Dank shared with us, and they're seas of asphalt. But can you imagine if we could, unearth all of that asphalt, bring nature into the schoolyards, unlock the gates, and allow the students' parents, their guardians, their neighbors to use the school, after school, weekends, during summer break. We really can move that park equity needle across the country and in California in particular. And I think the many examples that we've heard of today are just amazing. And to get to scale, and that's the big issue, right? How do we get that amazing work that Berkeley is doing, that amazing work that RMC is funding? The screenshot I have behind me is Cesar Chavez Elementary in the Fruitvale District in Oakland. How do we get more of these things to what Walter at Cal Fire said? How do we bring equity across the state? And I think it's really about scale. And when putting my advocate hat on, Secretary Crowfoot, I think there are 5 key things that the state could be doing and advocates can be doing to help get green schoolyards to scale. You heard board member Gomez talk about 1,000 schools in LA. Sharon talked about 10,000 public schools in California. The way we scale is school districts alone cannot do this. They really need to partner with nonprofits across the state who are ready, willing, and able to partner with school districts to make this happen. And as this administration and you, Secretary Crowfoot, at the Natural Resources Agency, partnering with government as a nonprofit is often very challenging. Mm-hmm. And I think school districts need to think about cutting the green tape and thinking about bureaucracy very differently, because bringing, federal money, state money, and non-education money to a project at a school district is complicated. And so I think school districts need to form policies to cut the bureaucracy, to allow nonprofits to really help bring resources and dollars to the school at scale. So that's one. The second is, the state architect. All public schools are essentially state property, and our state architect, right, is still very much following guidelines that were written, 40 years ago, and thinking about schools very much from the brick and mortar perspective and not necessarily the school grounds, and helping the think about the state architect and really changing the nature of the review process to streamline it, to make it easier, and to prioritize, greening efforts in the state of California. The third recommendation I would make is I think we need to revisit Cal Green, right? The document for all development of buildings and landscapes in California, and think about it from a school perspective. There's been some real progress in Cal Green around tree canopy, but again, it doesn't necessarily discuss where that tree canopy should go. So oftentimes it's decorative in the front of the school and not necessarily in the playground where we need it. So that would be, the third. The fourth, I think school districts need to partner with their local recreation and park department and their city. Back to what Director Gona said, I think schools alone can't do this by themselves. It's a community. We all need to provide resources and help. And I think local government and our cities really need to partner with school districts, not just in a joint agreement, but this is how we can deal with maintenance. This is how we can deal with park equity. There's ways that we can share resources across the school district and the city to make that happen. And then that last bucket, I think funding is critical. There's federal dollars that are coming down in green infrastructure. How do we bring that in to the school district? There is absolutely the work that this administration has done on extreme heat. How do we make that easier for school districts to capture, and how do we increase that? And then there's all the water bonds and stormwater capture, all opportunities without touching a single dollar from the school. And I think when school bonds come forward, the advocates that are all participating and watching, we as advocates need to work with our school district to make sure that their capital and facilities plans include green schoolyards. And so when they present this to the voter, and looking for approval for continued facilities funding that we incorporate green schoolyards and that school bonds going forward. So those are kind of the 6 things I would throw out as ways to get to scale.
Well, that's great. And obviously we're starting the conversation here today, and we're not gonna be able to, make too much progress on any of these ideas, but thank you, Guillermo, for getting them in the mix, because the whole idea here is we want this discussion to catalyze a deeper dive into really how do we make it easier for schools to get this done. I want to integrate Sharon and Walter into the conversation and start to answer some of the questions that we're getting from our participants. Excellent questions. Maybe first one for you, Sharon. There's some folks here like Tilly and Danner and others that are saying, hey, where do we get started if we're trying to actually help a school go green or do a green schoolyard? What are good resources to start? And while you're explaining that, I'll share that we've got a colleague from Marcus from Stockton School District that wants to better understand where is there a resource for funding options. In other words, people that want to do this work, where can they start to find information resources around how to get it done?
A lot of integrated questions.
Yeah.
I'm not sure which piece to take, but I should say on our website, greenschoolyards.org, we have a whole national outdoor learning library that was created during the pandemic with the help of about 300 volunteers from all across the country. And there are how-to guides on getting started with a significant amount of information about during the pandemic, how might you do it outdoors? But I think a lot of the information there is also relevant before and after the pandemic as well. And so there's an outdoor infrastructure chapter, for example, that has how to set up outdoor classroom spaces, and 2 different guides that are pathways through this library, which has 250 resources in it that are all free. So one for schools, how do you think about your site? And another one for districts, how do you think about scaling? And it leads you through the materials in the library. So that's one place to start. There's also a chapter on ecological features of grounds. I know that that ESSER funds for the pandemic relief, for example, can be spent outside, particularly for outdoor classroom creation, so that to help reduce virus transmission and improve mental health. So those aspects of ESSER funds, if they're not yet allocated, the federal funds coming through can be used in some cases for the small and medium scale work as well. We've seen a lot of schools do that successfully.
That's great. That's a really good start. And I'll stay on the resources side. We've got, as I said, this $50 million proposal for a Green Schoolyards program. And if the legislature supports that this summer, we're going to be developing guidelines for that program. And we want to do so in partnership, certainly with our colleagues at the California Department of Education, who are really eager to partner with us, and with folks like Kelly and those who are leading school districts. We want to help this. We want to ensure that this funding is accessible, isn't overly difficult to access, and can be blended with other funding as well. So more on that to come here in coming months. But if we're successful, we're going to have a really strong anchor program that builds off some of the other state resources that already exist that school districts can tap into fairly easily. Kelly, I want to ask a question for you, which is Nicola asked a question, hearing from the school principal where she is, that blacktop and artificial grass is needed for PE teachers to offer class. So how, you or Sharon or others, how would what's the help provide some ammunition against that argument that we need that 100% blacktop for PE?
Well, I certainly don't think you need the 100% blacktop. I think it's about combating the mindsets that we have traditionally, right? That there are innovative ways that we can, when it's a rainy day and the PE is offered, in the auditorium, perhaps. So I think it's about thinking about creative solutions and thinking about how to get to yes, because there's a lot of issues like that. I think in the chat, there was also some mentions around liability concerns. And I hear that from principals as well. The tree roots, kids are tripping on them. There are ways that we can help get around some of those challenges and ultimately just be thinking about the long-term goal and the benefit that it will reap for our students.
Yeah, so well put. Nicola, the same person, just raised this the concept of climate racism, referring to people of low income, predominantly Black and brown communities having less access to green spaces. I think Walter had pointed this out. This fundamental disparity in access to green spaces. I just want to lift that up and recognizing that's something that we're tackling. And I think it's our intent with this $50 million to focus on those schools in the communities most vulnerable to extreme heat as a result of both where they're located, but then also their lack of canopy. So we recognize that we have to redress fundamental inequities, as we're working to build the canopy into our systems. Question from, there was a professor from UC Davis who was just asking about, and I'm sorry, I can't, looking for your, Alessandro, Professor Osola, and asking what are the barriers and enablers for increasing canopy cover in schoolyards, particularly in underserved communities. Walter, you and your team have done a lot of work on schoolyards. I mean, what do you see? What have been the biggest barriers, and how have you worked with schools to overcome them?
So I actually think Kelly has a better perspective, and she did identify that there's some historic perspectives about what the need is for program space, whether that's asphalt or other kinds of hard surface. We need to correct some of the policies that design schools in the first place. So
yeah, really good. I want to say that Neelam raised her hand.
Yeah, I want to just say I think the secret sauce is in education and communication. We need to start redefining our cities and our schools as a human-only space. That's how they were designed. I had my students do a biodiversity survey and count the number of different types of insects and animals and plants on campus, and they were coming up in less than 5 for all those categories. And then they're like, well, I got 25 insects, but are they 25 different types, or are they 25 flies? And they're like, oh, it's just 25. I saw 25 ants or something. So we need to really start to redefine the difference between a city that was designed just for humans to keep humans in and everything else out, and change that. I think that's the fundamental axis upon which we need to embark.
Yeah, so well put.
And also, sorry, one other thing. When we actually have funding for 3 more forests, and we're negotiating with schools, but the big thing that we keep getting pushback on is principals are saying, no, my children need school, they need space to run. But we need to, if we involve the kids, they would probably, and we ask them, would you give up some of your play space to include Mother Nature in your schoolyard? They would probably say yes. So there's this constant back and forth. This is just the reality of being on the ground between the community, the parents, the principals, and finding space to reinsert nature back where she belongs.
Yeah, so well put. I do want to make a point or share something that Drew shared with us, and that is implementing stormwater capture funding and stormwater capture programs as a really good potential source of funding. I think Kelly had mentioned this that she saw it in the chat. Many counties, such as Los Angeles, have raised significant funding for stormwater capture to reduce the amount of stormwater that just pushes off into sewers and carries pollution to rivers or the bay, but instead actually captures the water. And obviously, one way to do that is to replace asphalt or hardscape with permeable surface. So that's another really potentially important use of or source of funding for these green schoolyard projects, and that's really exciting as well. Sharon, I'm interested, as we're coming into our last 10 minutes of discussion. I'd like you to share some work that you're doing with some of our partners at the state to step back and really understand more broadly, how do we tackle this problem at a statewide scale? The problem being, or the challenge being, we don't want to just feel good about ourselves if we fund a project here or a project there, but we want to make impact at scale. So can you talk a little bit about, your approach and what's on the horizon?
Sure, be happy to. Thanks. Green Schoolyards America is partnering with CAL FIRE, the California Department of Education, and a nonprofit called 10 Strands to create what will be a new decades-long initiative, I think, called the California Schoolyard Forest System. And our goal is to be able to have, with this new statewide initiative, is to increase the tree canopy on public school grounds across California in order to shade and protect pre-K to 12 students from extreme heat and rising temperatures due to climate change. We think that every school needs a climate oasis where the kids are. And a patch of trees that's contiguous, that's an actual forest, more so than the ones that are distributed in different tree wells around the site. Those are important too, but to also have a place to get inside with a cooler climate when it's hot. And I think that in some parts of the state that are already hot, we'll see in the next few decades that this is vital to just go outside and be active. As climate in LA becomes more like climate in Phoenix, we look at the Phoenix schoolyards now and see that they have shade canopies everywhere. So if we're planting trees now, we will grow shade canopies when they are the most needed. And so the idea with this project is to set up a statewide system that will have technical support and materials that will help people to do this at different scales that's right for them, but to be able to provide some kind of backbone support that other organizations and agencies can plug into, and that school districts can join and get assistance from down the road. We're still setting it up, but will be able to not have to reinvent the wheel to do this every time. And we're all different kinds of forests. I definitely see Miyawaki forests in there, Neelam, and other types of forestry. But the idea is just patches of forest. So planting enough trees. Our goals are to plant enough trees by 2030 that when they grow up, they'll cover, say, 30% of the grounds, or at least a contiguous patch in each schoolyard where the kids are, rather than in the front of the building, say. Centering equity in this initiative by prioritizing, as you were saying, Secretary Crowfoot, the schools and districts in underserved communities with the highest poverty levels, fewest trees, and hottest climates, so that the trees go first to the places where they are absolutely needed the most. And everyone, we think, should have these two, but there's definitely places that desperately need it. And the idea is also to use the grounds as a PK-12 learning laboratory across the curriculum and the grade levels to build in environmental and climate literacy programs by engaging kids in the process in the hands-on research and design and planting and stewardship components. So, I mean, climate, as was mentioned earlier by other speakers, is really depressing for kids. And this is a place, schoolyards are at a scale where kids can be change makers and can feel good about what they're learning. They can learn that there's a problem. They can look at their schoolyard and they can help to fix it by measuring the temperatures and telling the adults where it's the hottest and helping to plant the trees and take care of them. And so, we envision it being in part a child planted forest. And we've got good examples of those around the state where kids have been involved and the trees have grown up as well.
So the California Schoolyard Forest System effort, is that, when can folks find out more about that? Or
we should have the first webpage up shortly, but we do have an interest form for those who would like to sign up and tell us that they'd like to learn more in the future. We'll do a more a detailed, longer launch, I think, toward the fall. Walter, do you want to add any more things here? But we would love people to sign up on the interest form, tell us you're interested, and we'll reach out as the program develops.
Yeah, I think Sharon's description is spot on. Really, we're just creating a framework, a toolbox of options and resources for school districts to walk through those steps of increasing their green space, as opportunities arise. So, we want to lay the groundwork first so that when a campus identifies the need, they have a logical methodology to start taking action. And, to Secretary Crowfoot's point, we want to get this funding out on the ground as quickly as possible and make the biggest effect that we can.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's great comments coming through in the Q&A, and it's clear that this discussion has attracted a lot of change makers, folks working in their communities or their schools to get this done. And I'll remind everybody that a recording of this will be available, I think, come tomorrow on our agency website, which is resources.ca.gov. And if we do secure this $50 million, we will likely be bringing folks together to provide input on how to build that program. So that could be another area of connectivity. It definitely seems like, there's a lot of important work underway, and we need to help build this network. If we're really building a network, help all of these change makers across the state actually get projects done, and then help districts get projects done more quickly and holistically. So that if you have leaders like Kelly at LA Unified, LA Unified versus, thinking about this project or that project is thinking about dozens of projects at once, which is really, really exciting. As we wind down our conversation here today, I want to turn it to our partners here, our leaders, for any final words that they have. So we'll call this a quick speed round. And you could leave us with a thought in terms of, it could be what you hope to see, one important thing you want to make sure that we remember, or problem we need to solve. So I'll pick on my colleague Mark to start. What final deep thought, Mark?
Well, working with the various school districts, we have 87 school districts within the Los Angeles metropolitan area. And they all have their different philosophies on how to approach this. Just collectively getting that message out to all of them about this type of opportunity, and that they can work with partners in the community and their funding sources, most likely that some of them have not thought about. And we had some of those, through some of the questions in the chat, that there are these opportunities out there. So getting the word out to all of those districts.
Thanks so much. Our champion in residence, Neelam, getting it done in the Bay Area. Final thoughts.
Sorry, the internet cut out. It's like still rebooting. But can you hear me okay?
We can hear you, yep.
Okay, great. So my goal is to scale this. I'm so excited to be with all of you and part of this conversation. I am partnering with CIB and Assemblymember Wicks for a $7 million initiative to have 50 Milwaukee forests in the next 3 years across California, and particularly targeting low-income areas of color where students don't have access to nature. So I believe we can scale. We planted 3 forests in 10 days, and we needed 6 weeks to do it after we got our funding and everything. So we planted, in 6 weeks, we planted 3 forests, and now they're growing at an incredible speed. I would love to show you, but I don't have the slides with me. We can do it. That's my final thought.
All right. Kelly, leading the charge in one of the largest school districts in the country. Thoughts?
Yeah, I'm really excited about the collective energy in this space. And I think it is really about learning from each other. And for those who are newer in the pathway, trying to figure out what's the playbook to maybe it's initially starting greening projects in your district. For others, it's how do you tap into these outside funding streams that I don't necessarily have access to. And then for a place like LA Unified, where we've started, but we're not at scale, we need to do more. I think someone shared in the chat a resolution that San Francisco Unified passed and has done to reallocate bond dollars. So I think it's about looking at every kind of part of the spectrum of where you are in the Green Schoolyards effort to figure out where you plug in. And then I'm really interested in how I can help support and work with other board members across the state to really make sure that we have the support to lead these efforts in our districts, because we know that that's where the change is going to happen.
Thank you so much. Guillermo.
I would say that the best advice, I think, is really involving the entire school community in the design of what can happen. We saw the students that Neelam shared with us, that excitement. Those students, like them, are on every campus, and getting them, their teachers, their parents and guardians engaged. But I also think we need to invite our custodial staff, and we need to invite our operations and maintenance facilities staff. They know what these campuses are like, and they also need to be included in the equation and in the conversation to come up with amazing designs.
Thank you, Guillermo. Walter, our state's urban forester.
I would just say there's obviously a lot of interest, a lot of different perspectives, and we all need to remember that we're part of the Green Schoolyards community. So our unified commitment to getting this problem solved is what's going to make the biggest difference.
Absolutely. Sharon.
Thanks. I agree with what everyone has said here. The interdisciplinary collaboration, I think, is absolutely central, and within that, doing what you can where you are within your own role, whether you're a student, a parent, a board member, or work for the government. I think everyone can do what they can where they are, and we'll move forward together that way. And we I should say our first step on the forest system is we are going to be working on some focus groups. And so if you work with a public agency or with a school district or county office of ed or tree planting organizations and other folks in the movement, please sign up on our list that we on the link there, and we would love to get in touch and talk with you more about what's needed.
Well, that's great. And I'll finally say, first of all, thank you to you guys who participated in our discussion and everybody who joined. It's a really energizing conversation. We in state government, from the governor and the state superintendent for education and legislators and our agencies, I think the stars are really aligned. You have leaders that want to prioritize this and recognize that we need to prioritize this. We've got unprecedented resources and principal level focus on this. So from Sacramento and state government, we're going to do whatever we can to put wind in your sails for getting these projects done, because it really is about the local school, the local community, the local school district. And I'm really, really optimistic to what can happen here in coming months and years. So with that, huge thanks for all that you're doing. And James, I don't know if we have a final slide. If you have questions or suggestions for us or information you're looking for that wasn't provided by the chat or verbally, hit us up at outreach@resources.ca.gov. And lastly, I'll say, looking at this slide and seeing Kelly and the school principal and the cadets and the volunteers from Tree People at Pacoima Middle School, let's get many more of these projects done in coming years and decades. Thanks so much, everybody. Take care and talk again soon.